how much money on average you think a page of a solicitation costs you. And they answered the question. They said somewhere between $10,000 and $25,000. And the number of heads in the government setting that whipped around and were like, are you serious? Like that much money?
Welcome to the Optimize Podcast, brought to you by VisibleThread. The Optimize Podcast is your go-to source for expert insights on BD, capture, proposal management, and government contracting. Each series is hosted by an expert in the field, bringing their unique experience and strategies to every episode. We're excited to kick off Series 4 with our new host, Chris Ham. Chris is the CEO of Fin Acquisitions and former senior executive at GSA's Assisted Acquisition Services, where he oversaw $75 billion in contracts. Now he's bringing that insight to the podcast, exploring the strategies and future of federal contracting. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on wherever you are listening. Now let's join Chris on this episode.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Optimize Podcast, sponsored by VisibleThread. I'm your host, Chris Ham, and here now we have a guest that has the same quals that I did for one of the, either sounds like an amazing role or like something completely made up, a acquisition innovation advocate from another agency where Harrison and I met along with some other stuff. So welcome to the podcast, Harrison Smith.
Thanks for having me, Chris. I appreciate it.
All right. So we crossed paths a bunch, maybe 10 years or so in acquisition circles. People may not realize this, but like there are acquisition meetups and,
Yes.
different, conferences and events. And you've always been one of the guys that had the same ideas, but you got them from different places. So, and you did them in different places. So can you give me just a quick rundown of like, your background, your contracting, and then the evolution to the different federal agencies?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So I started as a presidential management fellow at the Naval Sea Systems Command.
Me too.
Oh, you stop it.
I was a PMF at GSA. Yeah.
Right, it was called PMI back in the day, so we're kind of dating ourselves. But yeah, started over there doing primarily research and development, some of that work as well as ships construction. So the worked on a carrier overhaul, which essentially is a nuclear power plant on its side. It's very, very complicated. Then shifted over to straight research and development contracting at DHS in 2005, which was a very, I will say, interesting, compelling time for DHS, right? It had the time to sort of stand up a little bit, but there was a lot of movement and a lot of effort and a lot of things that needed to get done. So I actually started doing work in radiological and nuclear detection. Used a lot of R&D contracting, FAR Part 35, for those of you who might be at some of those procurement weenie meetings that Chris referenced earlier. And then I shifted over to IT. And that was really when I started to wonder about not only how industry interacts with the government, but also some of the innovation pieces that you mentioned, right? I mean, we would be able to go out via a broad agency announcement and ask firms and ask companies, hey, find a new material that will help us detect bombs and IEDs that are coming across the border into the country. Just tell us how you're going to do it. Figure that out. That's your desired end goal or outcome. And then when we go to software applications or solutions, we in the government would get really, really specific about exactly how something needed to be done. And then on the tail end, we would argue about, well, I want innovation, I want different things. And so I started to see this sort of natural tension and wanted to be able to use the innovative techniques, OTAs, emergency announcements, all these kinds of things in IT procurements. And that ultimately led to my time as the industry liaison at DHS, supporting SRI, CREA, and many other folks that we both know and respect. And then shifted over to the IRS, where I was the Deputy Chief Procurement Officer for about 5 years before I was asked to stand up a innovation and digitalization office at the IRS, primarily focused around how the IRS handled paper, as well as how it ingested tax returns and the like. Ultimately, your point around the acquisition innovation advocate, that was my last last spot within the government at FDIC. And it was really interesting across NAVSEA. It's a Department of War, obviously. It's DHS, right, which is a civilian agency, but also has some law enforcement areas around Secret Service and Coast Guard and the like. And then the IRS Treasury, right? And then the FDIC, which is not FAR-based. The number of times that I ran into the same exact challenges, problems, opportunities in every single of those spots was really, really very interesting. Everyone had the same challenges. Everyone had the same opportunities. It was both honestly comforting, but also a little irritating at times.
All right. So my first question for you is, because of your time at IRS, what is your risk tolerance when you do your own taxes?
Well, so it's the relatively close to zero. Especially, I had the honor of being an executive at the IRS, which means you get a full audit every year. So it was very low. My wife made the joke, "Oh, hey, does this mean we don't have to pay taxes?" I was like, "Sweetheart, it's the other way around." There is no, I need receipts for everything, but it doesn't require a receipt, right? You only got $5 in interest from Navy Federal. Don't care. Got to print that out and send it in. That was nil is the answer.
Did you also have to do the 278 transaction reports?
Yes. I mean,
Oof.
those are, it was really, honestly, at least for me, it was pretty straightforward because it was like I had the TSP, which for those of you who don't know, that's the government's 401k. And I had like a mutual fund and a real estate investment trust, thing that I had really not very much money at all to speak of on. But the number of folks who I saw that, yes, I reported a transaction, I sold something, like that's an awful lot of work. I just put my money in the TSP and kind of let it be. So, but it was strange to have, I don't know if strange, but it was an interesting aspect of being an executive where all of your financial business is evident to anybody who wants to take a look at it. What you get paid, whether or not you get a bonus, what your stock transactions are. I always thought it was part of the gig and honestly kind of appreciated the transparency.
Yeah. I mean, whoever's listening to this, pause, search his name or my name. You will see our salary. You will see that in that details. I mean, this isn't the point of the podcast, but it's one of those things that like people don't realize the cost of like being inside and like having the control over this amount of money is like, you have to be above board on everything.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think that's the piece around, again, and we could joke about the 278 system not being the most user-friendly interface of all time. But yeah, when you are supporting the American taxpayer quite literally, and you're dealing with you dealt with more commas than I did on an ongoing basis, but we would have transactions of hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. You've got to be clear about what you're doing and where your interests lie. And I think that sort of dovetails nicely into the conversation around being transparent with the folks that we're doing business with. My favorite sort of mini spiel whenever I was at DHS and also at Treasury and FDIC was that the federal government is neither appropriated nor authorized to do all the work itself. So why not make the relationship with the firms that you're doing business with as seamless and as efficient as possible? Because otherwise, you're going to end up paying for in opportunity cost loss. You're going to end up paying for the amount of time that people spend and money that people spend trying to figure out what you're trying to do as the government. You're going to pay for that somehow. So why not try to streamline that process?
This is one of those things that, everybody who's been in our jobs get onto their soapbox about the need for transparency, the need for like information, like when is it going to come out? What's it called? Who's the incumbent? What do you actually want in the future? And it's all in FAR Part 1 that you're supposed to meet with everybody. But then every system out there reinforces, don't talk, write it down, make them guess. So what were you doing to try and overcome that?
Well, I first want to acknowledge that I messed up quite a bit, and that's how I learned. So I'll give a quick example. Back when I was at the Domestic Nuclear Detection Office, I was very, very proud of myself. I said, listen, I'm going to post things it was FedBizOps back in the day, right? I would post things and I wouldn't talk to anybody. I was going to meet with anybody. Everybody got the same information at the same exact time. And I was very proud of myself. There's a lot of, there's a conversation somewhere about humility and hubris somewhere, but I was very proud of myself. And I didn't talk to anybody, didn't meet with anyone, put out my draft solicitation, put out all the updated information and ran the procurement. And then after awarding the procurement, I had somebody come in and said, why didn't you talk to anybody? Were you like, did you have an idea of who you wanted to award to? And I said, no. The other way around. I was actually trying really hard to make sure everyone had access to the same information at the same time. So I didn't want to meet with anybody. And the gentleman I was talking to just sat back and chuckled. He goes, we thought you had it geared towards somebody else. And that to me is one of the primary things that I don't think the government realizes. Like what I wish I knew, right, when I was in the government, lack of information, delays, really anything like that, not being willing to meet with folks. Most firms are going to say it's wired for somebody. I mean, key personnel, right? That's another thing. I was also a customer of procurement for quite some time. But when I was at DHS, I issued a small, it was like 4 or 5 people. So a small services contract. I made all the key personnel, all the people who are going to support it, key personnel. And in my mind at the time, I was like, okay, great. I don't want to bait and switch, right? I don't want somebody to propose this person who I really liked, and then 6 months in or a year into the contract, switch it out with somebody else. They've got to get my approval to do that. That was my thought behind it. And no matter how many times we tried to relay that in the solicitation and in Q&As, I got a similar concept. We thought it was wired for somebody because all you had was key personnel. And so I bring those 2 examples up because well-intentioned, right? But didn't do a good job, right? Messed it up. And so I think some of the spaces where our community understanding what drives behavior is really, really important. But I also think, Chris, you probably agree with this. It's one thing as a contracting officer or as an executive over a shop that deals with a whole bunch of procurements, we can think about it. We can spend time to do reverse industry days. We can spend time to meet with people before, during, and after solicitations and procurements. But it's different when it makes up a decision about whether or not you go after bid, whether or not you make payroll, whether or not your company will still exist. Like, these are different perspectives. And even for the folks who try very, very hard within government are doing a good job in this space, you're not spending day to day on these types of activities, and industry is. And so that conversation that we need to have to make sure we understand what's going on, what's causing behavior, I think is really important. I'm sure you see the same thing because you've been out for a comparable amount of time.
All right, so let me unpack one of the statements you made, and then use an industry acronym that the government people don't know. There are acquisitions that are conducted by the government that are wired. That does exist. In the extreme rare case, as a percentage of the overall acquisitions, there are, I used to call them Michael Jordan competitions where, it was them versus my middle school, basketball player, where the qual is just, it's not even possible. But that's not the default. The default is public transparency and, posting and, whatever. But the acquisition workforce behind the scenes, they have a bunch of things they're trying to do, and they're trying to be fair, they're trying to put it out there, and they do not know the term P-win, and they do not know the gates that are inside of the companies in order to get the money to go continue to develop a proposal and spend X amount of money. So now I know that you're not on the other side.
Yep.
We'll talk a little bit about oh man, I didn't know that if they didn't return my phone call that X,
Oh, that's a perfect example. And just to make sure that the government friends who don't know about P-win is the percentage chance and it's a different methodology for many firms, but it's a percentage chance that you are actually going to win. And so when we're talking about these gate reviews that Chris and I are talking about, you essentially have to pitch to your internal leadership whether or not we're going to spend the B&P dollars, the bid and proposal dollars, to go after this work. And the number of times that you can see, even a little bit on the government side if you pay attention to it, but especially now, have you been able to talk to the customer? Do you know what drives their concerns? Do you understand what their pain points are? Those are real things that do not always come across, frequently don't come across in a solicitation. And so there is, again, that opportunity cost. If you're the government and if you're saying, hey, I'm not going to meet with anybody because I don't have time. I was at my first government sponsored industry day. I'm not going to say what agency it was, but I was at my first one, and they literally said, hey, we're not going to meet with you one-on-one. It's a lot easier for us to answer questions and answer comments that come across in our solicitations. That's what we're going to do. And I sat back and sort of chuckled myself because I said, you have now given a lot of people pause to pursuing your solicitations that you say are so important. You said you want the best and brightest, but you don't want to talk to them. Now, I get it. Like, you and I get it. Like, there's a lot of procurements that are people running, a lot of requirements, protests, your daily work. But if you can't, as the government, dedicate time to engaging with industry and helping them understand, there is an understandable and logical and rational response. Sometimes it's people don't bid. Sometimes it's capture people can't convince their CEO or can't convince the gate process to let them continue to pursue something. And sometimes it just costs more. Risk equals cost. And so you're going to get higher bids because industry, face it, is trying to adjust for what they see as inconsistency or risk in your requirement because they don't know what you want. Now, if you understand that as the government, and that's just what you have to deal with, then I think both you and I would say, okay, then you've accepted that risk and you can move on. But hopefully, at least somebody out there in the government chair is saying, I didn't realize that that was the repercussion of some of my actions. I didn't realize that my silence was causing that in industry, and hopefully it'll help them adjust a little bit.
Right. So the rigidity of the process inherently makes sense. Like, you want to have the solicitation that is out in writing with certain dates that they respond to, and so like the whole process of the formality is like how you engender the trust for the the public the acquisition system. But before you actually issue a solicitation, like the window of market research where you're supposed to be talking to suppliers about having interaction. My old office used to do something called due diligence, which was you put out a draft of what you want, and then you have one-on-one meetings. Like, you have, some exchange between the parties, mostly clarification questions. Like, what does this mean? You can't stand up and give a corporate capabilities brief, but there's a something.
Right.
Over time, that kind of dialogue has really lessened. Like, that exists, but it's not the meaningful aspect of it. So you now see other means of procurement that are trying to get closer to that, like a commercial solutions openings, or some of the create your own little stable with a BPA so that you can actually have more meetings with them. I know that you did something like that. You were trying to overcome the weirdness of I want to be innovative and I want to new, but I want to talk to you too, and I want to be able to test out stuff. Was that the Treasury? Was that the IRS thing?
Yeah, that was the Pilot IRS thing.
Yeah.
No, it was, and shout out to a bunch of folks who were instrumental in that and still in the government. Shanna Weber's, who's over at FDIC, she let me go on with that crazy idea. Mitch Winans, there's a whole bunch of folks, Marissa Roinstad, a lot of really great people doing that. But it came back to, I mentioned briefly about how come we can't use that open-ended, this is the outcome that I want, that we have in research and development contracting. How come we can't use that in information technology? And the odd answer is you can, even if it's not an OTA. And the IRS doesn't have any of these CSO authorities, doesn't have any of the other transaction authority capabilities. They don't have any of those things. So I ended up going down a very deep rabbit hole into the old commercial test item pilot that ended up being finalized in FAR 13.5 and 12.3, if memory serves. And very short version, it said for X types of services under 7.5 million, you can buy how the private sector buys. And so I took that part of the FAR as its word, ended up briefing folks at OFPP, again, super supportive folks, Treasury Council, all these things. We created a suite of contracts that we called Pilot IRS, which the requirement statement was usually 6 or 7 sentences long. I'll give an example. So we did one for scraping machine readable data off of paper returns or paper tax forms. We literally said we want to be able to extract machine readable data from forms and pieces of paper. We want to make sure that my words, this isn't actually what we said, but you play nice with the IRS IT infrastructure and how it needs to control and protect taxpayer information. And 3, we want it to be modular. So we don't want it to be just one form and not be able to, shift to another form or shift to another year. We want to make sure that that's possible. It was about 10 sentences. The entire solicitation was 12 pages long. There were no evaluation criteria besides how do you support those goals. There were no adjectival ratings. There was none of that. It was a confidence rating based on a 5-page written proposal and an oral pitch. And we ended up reusing this process again. We called it Pilot IRS. We used it for de-anonymizing cryptocurrency transactions. We used it for identifying what's the lowest resolution DPI that, again, you can scrape machine-readable data off of an image for. We used it for 12 or 13 things over the course of my time there. It never took longer than 35 calendar days, ever. And that's from solicitation release, the 5-page written response, and the oral briefs and the decision. And to me, the really cool part about it is we gated it. So you could have anywhere from 30 days to 6 months to prove what you were doing. Again, here's a dummy tax form, or here's a publicly available tax form. There's some ones that are posted on irs.gov. It's for charitable institutions, so it's not for an individual. But we said, scrape the information off of that. Show me how you can generate machine readable data. You have 30 days or 60 days to do it. And for the firms that came back and demonstrated what they were able to do, they gave us a pitch for the next amount of time. In some cases, it was 3 months. Some cases, it was 6 months. And we said, what are you going to do for that duration of time? And because we had already awarded the contract, it was a simple option exercise. Does the government like what you're able to do with this money? And so we created this construct where we knew we would probably award to folks who weren't able to be able to get it all the way there. But we had this automatic off valve, whether it was 30 days or 3 months or 6 months down the road, to say, hey, you know what? This isn't working. You're not able to do multiple forms. Let's turn you off. You're not able to go through the security checks that we need to make sure so that we can make sure the taxpayer data is controlled and protected. Turn it off. We ended up being able to ultimately scan 1.5 million 1040s using a contract that went through that process. That ability to shift exists everywhere. I think that's, to me, one of the things that's so interesting about the revolutionary FAR overhaul and the changes in the updates. Somebody, I forget who it was, wrote an article about, hey, it's great that all these levers are here, all these capabilities and capacities are here, but it doesn't change how the government is incentivized or has a habit of doing things in a particular way. So I think every time we talk about what you can do, how you can talk to people, how you can use FAR-based contracting in a way that is super innovative and super helpful to the user and industry, that's where we need to get to as a community, because it's good for the government, right? They get the longer and the more complicated an IT procurement audit is, the more likely it is to fail. And so, all right, well, let's not make longer and larger ones for the right types of requirements, the right type of procurements. Let's shorten that up. Let's tighten it up and say, hey, this is the outcome I want to get you to. Sorry, I want you to get me to. And then fund based on whether or not they're able to do so.
So I wasn't going to get into the area of protest, but you just reminded me of something here. This is another one of those lessons for the people still inside. The longer it is, the more the sunk cost means something to the company. So like the environment you were talking about, $7 million, a bunch of small businesses. If you get a no, but you get a quick breakup no, it is fine. You go after something for a year, you're invested in it, you care about it, you spent money on it, then you're more likely to get the protest because, like, we were counting on this one. Like, this one was big for us.
Yeah, 100%. And when there's two things here that I think are really worth noting is that a number that came out in one of the DHS reverse industry days that we did. And I remembered I was sitting next to Luke McCormick, Rob Palmer, I think it was, and a handful of other DHS headquarters CIO staff. And I told the companies who were up there presenting to a whole bunch of DHS acquisition professionals, I told them I was going to ask the question. I said, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to ask a question to get us started. I want you to tell me, don't tell me now, but I want you to tell the group when I ask the question, how much money on average you think a page of a solicitation costs you? And so I stood up, didn't know what the answer was going to be. And they answered the question. They said somewhere between $10,000 and $25,000. And the number of heads in the government setting that whipped around and were like, are you serious? Like that much money? And so if you have 50 proposals and you round it up for your 7-page technical response to 10 pages, well, that's, you're talking about real money for a while. And that I think gets into the debriefing, right? Sometimes protest is just I want to find out what you thought of my requirement. And I get that the government, like if it's in a situation where it doesn't want to open up the kimono fully because you're going to give quote unquote fodder, right? To me, when I was sitting on the government side, I thought there were always three types of people who would protest. One is somebody who's going to protest no matter what because that's their personality, or maybe they have an incentive to do so, incumbent, whatever it is. There's that kind. There's somebody who will never protest because they don't have the time or the effort or the money to do it, and that's just not their personality or something along those lines. And three, somebody who isn't sure that you understood their procurement and thought you might have made a misstep. If you give industry as much information as you feel comfortable giving them, you don't affect group one, you don't affect group two, because nothing you do is ever going to affect them. But you are going to reduce the number of people who might protest to say, hey, you didn't give me enough information. I need some more information to understand. And so like that's some of the irony around the brief explanation for award, right? That is available under GSA schedules. Yeah, that's absolutely authorized. But again, there's an outcome to that you may want to be aware of from the government perspective. I always found I always tried to provide as much information as I possibly could. And that wasn't just in the award decisions. That was even when we were still evaluating proposals, we would post every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, an update on FedBizOps. Still working, don't know when we're going to be done. Sorry. I don't think we said sorry. But just that cadence and that information helps people feel more comfortable and frankly helps industry not get wound up in its own, I wonder if this is happening. I wonder if that's happening. I wonder if it's going to extend it. I wonder all these things. So that transparency, whenever possible, really, really does help.
Yeah, I mean, I know that because I used to have to do that, and it was one of those things where, like, if you don't communicate, I mean, there were industry associations, and I didn't love all of them. I went to all of them. And, I spoke at every Alliant 2 PMR and every Oasis meeting and whatever else because they needed to have a face and a name that was going to take their call, that was going to make them feel that the thing was fair, that the entire process that we were going to respond to you. There are not a lot of, federal civilian agencies that have that kind of regular dialogue with industry.
Yeah. And I think that some of it has to do with, and I think it's easy for industry to, pardon the phrase, rail on the government about these things. But a lot of people don't realize how many transactions contracting officers are going through. Like there's a lot of these. And it's usually one person isn't working on one procurement. It can be one sometimes if it's huge, but it can be anywhere up to 100 contract actions a year. And that's for like substantive contract actions. I think if you're trying to understand from the government side, right, this is sort of like the translation required, right? If you're trying to understand from the industry side, why government is doing what it's doing, think about how you as an industry person doesn't necessarily want to give a very transparent and completely honest comment about a solicitation term, either on the Q&A or in person. And obviously, like you have to be comfortable with that government person. You have to be comfortable how you're asking the question. But I'll tell you, and I'm sure you have the same thing, Chris, like when I was running enterprise license agreements over at the Enterprise Acquisitions Division at DHS, when we were doing First Source 2 and all those, the Oracle ELAs and all those things, I could not understand why why offers kept on pounding the table about essential use to the government. I'm like, I don't understand what's going on. And I finally got a friend who I still talk to today. He said, Harrison, the reason people are focusing on that is because resellers frequently have to borrow money to pay the OEM, to pay Oracle, to pay Adobe on day one. And no one's going to loan them money unless you, the government, say how important this software application is to how they're doing business. And I just remember my jaw dropping. I was like, what? It's like, oh yeah. And it can affect the cost of money to those firms as well. I was like, really? It's like, yeah, it's like you could be single percentage points at times. It can be 25 percentage points at times. And to me, the concept of having the federal government get like a worse APR than like a college freshman trying to get a free t-shirt because they're getting a Capital One card or a Chase card or whatever, on a college campus. I'm like, that's crazy to me. And so those, again, are the sort of real opportunity costs and the real dollars and cents costs that come with not being transparent. And again, if you're the government and you know this, and for some rational reason that I might actually disagree with, but if for some rational reason this is what you decide to do, then good on you. That's your decision, and I'll back you up, on the government side, on the industry side. But if you don't know those things and you don't have your ears open, you don't realize that you have literally made a requirement cost more money to the government than you otherwise could have.
Yeah. I mean, part of that's the reason why the dynamic between the traditionals and the non-traditionals exists now. If you want something that's compliant, that answers your detailed solicitation, that's what the Beltway does. It was built to do that. If you want to have the disruption innovation people listen to you, they're not mining SAM.gov every day. Like they don't know what an ATO and FedRAMP means for them when they're bidding on Pilot IRS.
Yeah. No, and that's and that's actually one of the very interesting things that I think is really starting to come, because for a long time it was, I can't get the contract awarded in time, right? And I think in some spaces, and applaud all the people who are associated with it. In some significant spaces, we've shown how there are more ways to be able to do that more quickly. So that's done, right? And not that's necessarily easy, but that path is there. And I think the revolutionary FAR overhaul, and the work from Polly Hall and Bonnie Evangelista and Scott Simpson and Eric Cho, just go on down the list. That really great work done by those people continues to push that. There's the issue of personal security clearances, right? That continues to be a challenge. But to me, like the last mile, if you'll pardon that phrase, the last mile is the ATO, right? And when you talk compliance automation and FedRAMP processes and NIST 853 requirements, it's got 1,189 controls, and the low profile has 150, and the moderate has 325, and the high is 425. People's eyes literally glaze over. They're like, I don't care. But if you go to a CIO and go, hey, are you frustrated by how long it takes your ATOs to go through? Well, now they're going to shift and kind of be like, well, yes, but it's really important that we have, that we understand our risk. And so I think there's also it's incumbent upon, no pun intended, but it's incumbent upon both the government and industry to be able to communicate in such a way where you talk to somebody about what their need is, right? Government's got to understand, or at least appreciate, that the more you talk to industry and the further out, the more likely you are to get better, probably less proposals that are better priced and more tightly pointed to your requirement. Like that's what you're going to get if you're going to start 6, 12, 18 months out. This is what I'm doing. This is who I want to talk to. This is my requirement. Here's my pricing schedule. Like it helps tighten everything up. You have that conversation, will get you out there. FedRAMP, right? There's been a lot of conversation in some circles around how they're changing requirements as it pertains to machine readable documentation for security artifacts. Again, that's a very precise conversation that a lot of people may not want to have. But if you are able to communicate to somebody and say, hey, some of the changes that FedRAMP is going through and the requirement for machine readable compliance artifacts in September, by the way, of this year, that's going to result in the potential for you as a government agency or you as a CSP to spend less time and less money on ATOs with a better understanding of risk. Well, now that's a conversation that I'm interested in having. And so I think taking the time to understand what the government's pain point is, and from the government's perspective, taking the time to understand what industry is trying to find out. Kind of like it goes back to your point around the traditional folks or the innovators, right? You've got to understand what drives that perspective, and you've got to understand what they're interested in and speak their language. That's the most inherent form of respect. Listen to somebody, understand what their challenges are, and speak their language to them.
And this is one of those things that's now for this year into like largely into November that is affecting like almost every acquisition that I see. CMMC. So, here's all these changes to the FAR. Here's all of these ideas on how we're going to be disruptive and innovative, and we're going to be able to deal directly with like these non-traditionals. But you must comply by November with CMMC level 2, and some things are higher. Which basically means every document is marked CY, which means everything cannot be shared via any system anywhere. So any prime, like a large company that, is compliant, cannot subcontract with company X because they are not in this world of, the new level 2 stuff. So like the 2 points that the security side and the operations innovation side are not talking to each other at all right now.
No, and if they are, they're frequently talking in different languages, right? Because you've got that. I mean, it's, and again, I think part of that has to do with being able to find the time and to have that entire system's perspective around things, right? If you say, here, I am focused on what controls NIST 853 are important in this aspect, and that's all I care about. If I'm in procurement, all I care about is, have I checked all of the requirements that I need to check for this LSJ, for this justification and approval? That's what I'm trying to do. Have I done all my documentation? Like if you're focused on that and you don't understand that at the end of the day, we are all collectively, and I mean industry too, we are all collectively here to try to do good for the American government and the agencies that complete the missions. Like, that's the outcome. The outcome is not, I must follow all the checkboxes on my spreadsheet. No, you've got to be a human being and understand where the risks are, and is it appropriate to take them, and communicate with other people. And I think that's like with CMMC, the requirement's been out for a rather long time. Was it always communicated in a way, and was industry able to hear it in such a way where, like, it shouldn't be a surprise, right? It's difficult, certainly. It causes issues, certainly. But we need to be able to talk to each other as a community in such a way where it says, hey, CMMC is now going to be required. Oh, by the way, do you know there's a lead time with the three PAOs that you're going to have to contract with to get that assessment done? Oh, I didn't think about that. Like, we've got to have those conversations. And again, I got to bring it back to it. But I think the Rev 5 and 20X and FedRAMP, it's a great step forward. But we don't have a good community-wide understanding of what that means in terms from industry side. Can I get an ATO for my solution? Conversely, from the federal government, the AO or the CIO's perspective, I am going to understand my risk better. And I'm going to have to either, I'm going to understand my risk better, and I'll be able to manage my POAMs better. Like, we've got to have that conversation so people know what's coming. The information's there, but it's hard to allocate the time that's necessary and the cycles that are necessary to get us there collectively.
So you just reminded me of the perspective of, each role in the system. So like the security person versus the CIO versus the industry partner. Natural human behavior is to respond to the incentives that are presented to you. And so for, the company, win the work, revenue, profit, get promoted, live your life. Inside of government, a lot of people don't realize the altruism that you just espoused, like we are here to support the taxpayer. We are here to achieve an outcome. In the entirety of my federal career, I have never been investigated or audited to ask me, did I achieve the outcome that I was originally contracting for? I've only been inspected on, are all the files in the document? Was it compliant? There's never been a program effectiveness mindset on we achieve the outcome. So it's odd for people outside of government to understand. You're trying to do what's right, but then somebody's like, but you didn't use a blue folder on step 17.
Right. I mean, and just so that everyone knows, like, Chris is not being facetious. Like, you will get dinged for those things. And I'm sure it exists also in some of the larger, more bureaucratic, if you will, institutions, industry or academia. But I mean, that's your point, like, especially around disincentives, right? I remember the first time that I posted something publicly, and I remember having a conversation with myself. I was like, oh, I've been working on the solicitation for a while. It's like 80 pages and everyone can see it. Like, I'm putting it out for anyone and everyone to see at any point in time. That was a little scary, I'll be honest. It's interesting that we've probably flipped to the other side because people will espouse whatever they want on social media or LinkedIn or whatever it is. But without a second thought, excuse me. But I think the piece where a lot of industry folks, and where I think this is a very tangible way for industry to help and to incentivize government to do these good things, is to recognize folks. I mean, you talked about how, whatever I've been investigated for, right? Most of the time, I'm sure it was a way for me, like, our performance qualifications or our performance goals weren't necessarily tied to things like that. So, and you're in the government. So again, you go back to the 278, like, you're not going to get a percentage of a contract award, right, that you issue. That's just not what happens in the federal government. But if you're able to, there's any number of awards that are geared towards the federal community, say, hey, I think you did something that was worthwhile. I think that you did something that is worth recognition. Especially from the industry side, do that. Because it's a sort of a signal to other agencies. It's a signal to other government people that taking a step out and doing something that you can almost certainly get dinged for if it goes wrong, but you may not get a whole lot of attaboys if it goes well. Like, you have the opportunity with an industry to put somebody up for a Fed 100 award, to put somebody up for an Affirm, to put somebody up for an ACT IAC. Like, you could just Disruptor of the Year. You can just go on down the list. That's something that I continue to appreciate more and more being on the industry side now. It's not difficult to do. And I'm sure most of you know somebody who is really good at their job and should be recognized. Then take the time and do it. because you need to be able to offset that risk, right? That heightened sense of risk that government personnel are going to have, because it's going to be under the microscope.
Yeah, that is very great advice. In my old office, we used to have a team of professional writers and a calendar for when those events were, and we would routinely, even if they didn't get it, hey Harrison, I think you did a great job there, and I want to put you up for it. That alone drives the behavior that you're looking for.
100%, 100%. Again, to your point, even if they don't get it, even if they just know that you're putting in for something, it's really, really important for us to be able to do that as a community, because, especially for the folks who are really driving and pushing hard, they're going to be the ones who are least likely to pay attention to when and where that happens, right? So they're going to go from one challenge to the next challenge, the next challenge, the next challenge, doing good work, doing good things. And those are the people you want to make sure get recognized, because they're not going to pay attention to it. It's a very interesting dichotomy.
Oh, and they won't write themselves up.
No.
They will do what you've been doing. It's like, oh, it was the team. Oh, it was us.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a good thing too. So it's really fascinating to see the different levers and the different perspectives. And again, it all comes back to, in my mind, sort of transparency. And that's my hope with even some of the stuff that the RFO, the Revolutionary Fire Overhaul, has done that has been allowed for a long time, right? The whole directed solicitation. I used to do this transparently, I don't know, whatever, 10, 15 years ago, is I would put out an announcement on eBay and say, hey, FAR Part 8 point whatever allows me to provide this directly to a subset of all the schedule owners. Here's the RFI. Give me your responses back. Based on your RFI, under the auspices of market research, I'm going to talk to a subset of you. Based on those conversations, I'm then going to send it to some subset, whatever, 5 or 10, estimated to be 5 or 10. I will post it on eBay when I do that. If you want a copy of the solicitation, I'll give it to you. And without saying it word for word, what hopefully industry understood was, hey, happy to read all the RFIs. Don't want to get 1,700 proposals. Happy to meet with some folks as part of that conversation. But I'm going to give the solicitation directly to a handful of folks that I'm most interested in. Now, if you want a copy of the solicitation, I'll give it to you, and that's fine. And I'm not going to penalize you for not being aware of it immediately when I issued it. But that conversation, I think, is so wildly important, because it gets back to your point about sunk cost, right? If I've spent, if I responded to an RFI and it was 2 pages, and I didn't get invited back to have a conversation, well, now I know that maybe what I had to sell wasn't necessarily communicated in a way that the government liked it. Okay, I can lick my wound singular and shake off the dust and move on to the next one. If I've spent 3, 6, 9, 12 months on this thing, I want to find out what happened, and it's going to lead to having a protest or having the agency be seen as a bad customer. And that's another thing that I don't think necessarily people understand for the government side. I certainly didn't. But there are folks where industry will submit multiple bids to multiple requirements for an agency. And if they're 0 for 5 or 0 for 10 or whatever the number is, there's going to be a conversation about, hey, should we continue to spend time and money and effort on that? And that could be every procurement was done precisely right. Okay, well, maybe it's our fault on the industry side. But that's a calculation that happens, because there's a finite amount of money and there's a finite amount of time. And that's why if you ever hear of tier 1 agencies in the government, if you ever hear that, that's industry code for who I really pay attention to for whatever number of reasons. I think my solution and my past performance lends itself to that. I like the way that they run their procurements. I've got a GWAC that they use quite a bit. But again, these are sort of opportunity costs that the government has to kind of figure out and deal with.
So you know how the NFL Players Union started doing report cards on the different ownership groups?
Yes.
We should do this for the agencies, because I could throw out a couple of acronyms today, and you would be like, yep, they're harder to do business with right now. Like we could create our own scorecard. It would go viral.
It 100% would. But then again, it would go back, like you and I might be able to do that, right? But like the average industry person is be like, well, I don't want to piss that agency off, pardon the phrase, but I don't want to protest because they're going to be blackballed. Like it's hard to have that transparency. And when you ask for it from the industry, if industry asks for it for the government, you got to be willing to put your neck out there and say some things respectfully, right? under the auspices of improving things. But it's there are definitely, and even individuals. And it's sad to note, but it's like, oh, that person did this process again. I know what's coming. And sometimes it means that folks are going to go after something, and sometimes it means the exact opposite. They'll run for the hills. It's very
like rate my professor, rate my contracting officer.
Wow, we may have a new idea for an app, rate your contracting officer.
Oh, well, I think with that, we've probably hit where we should stop talking.
We could just keep going for, I don't know, another 45 minutes. It'd be great.
All right. Well, this has been a conversation around, the things that you can do inside of government as an acquisition, and then how it affects contractor behavior. This has been the Optimized podcast by VisibleThread, and I just want to thank Harrison again for being on with us for the show.
No, Chris, I really appreciate the time. It's something where we've both spent a lot of time in this community. I want to make sure it functions as efficiently as it reasonably can. And it's really fascinating to see that from this side of the table as well as the other.
And that wraps up this episode of the Optimized podcast. A big shout out to our amazing host, Chris Ham, and our guest, Harrison Smith. Optimize is brought to you by VisibleThread, the RFP software for analyzing solicitations and contracts, and for creating and editing proposals. VisibleThread is used by 11 of the top 15 US government contractors. For more information, visit VisibleThread.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you are listening. Stay tuned for more insightful discussions on the Optimized podcast.